Bank of England asking who we want on the next generation of banknotes. We'll hear from Winston Churchill's granddaughter. Join me, please, after the news.
On your radio, on the LBC app, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, it's 6 o'clock. US rapper Diddy has been convicted of 2 sex offences at his trial in New York, but cleared of sex trafficking and racketeering. Sean Combs' defence took just minutes as they persuaded jurors his lifestyle didn't amount to a criminal enterprise. Rob Shooter is his former publicist.
He doesn't come across as a monster. The opposite. He's one of the most charming people you will ever meet.
He's still facing up to 10 years in prison. Downing Street says Rachel Reeves has the full backing of the Prime Minister after she appeared upset at today's PMQs. A spokesperson for the Chancellor says she's dealing with a personal matter. The now former head of the Royal Navy says he deeply regrets his conduct after being sacked for inappropriate behaviour. Admiral Sir Ben Key was suspended in May after it emerged he was having a secret affair with a subordinate female officer. And a report has found a fire that caused Heathrow Airport to shut down could have been prevented. It says an issue with moisture at a nearby electrical substation was highlighted in 2018, but nothing was done to fix it. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed down 10 points at 87.74. The pound buys $1.36 and €1.15. LBC weather mainly dry tonight and clear with any showers in the north starting to ease. Outbreaks of rain for Northern Ireland and Western Scotland in the early hours, lows of 6 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Amelia Cox.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. It's 6 p.m. Now, Tonight with Andrew Marr.
Good evening. Politics is also theatre. The words they use, their expressions, the way they look. This is not all lines of numbers or policy conferences. It is human drama. And so, yes, it does matter that just after an absolutely eviscerating defeat over welfare and after failing to hear robust support from the Prime Minister, the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, was seen to be deeply distressed, in tears, at Prime Minister's questions this afternoon. Her team says this was a personal matter, no business of ours, may be true, but it's also true that she'd had a testy exchange with the Speaker. But her tears led to an assumption that she was about to resign or be fired, and that had real-world consequences. Britain's borrowing costs jumped, with the yield on 10-year gilts rising almost immediately, and the pound fell against the dollar. Rachel Reeves has been very unpopular among Labour MPs, but the markets, relatively speaking, seem to want her to stay. They fear that if she was hurled from a Treasury window after a rebellion by Labour MPs, her successor would be even likelier to raise taxes, likelier to borrow more, and they don't like that idea. I have always liked Rachel Reeves and admired her tenacity in what was so recently a man's world, but she hasn't got natural, persuasive political instincts. What happened to her today in the Commons chamber was absolutely horrible. I don't know why she lost it. I don't know whether she's safe in her job, though Number 10 say she is. But I do know that this week's ripping up of the welfare cuts has done severe damage to the authority of both the Chancellor and the Prime Minister. And I think the nature of this government is changing as a result. It's going to be listening more to Labour MPs, tilting a bit more to the left. For the time being, the markets have called it right. And that really was the meaning of today's genuine drama in the House of Commons. Now, in a moment, we'll hear from Lord Maurice Glassman, the guiding spirit behind Blue Labour and a man with a certain amount of influence in Downing Street. But we're going to start today with somebody who, as a former Home Secretary and Health Secretary, has been through many parliamentary dramas in his day. He's now also the author of the book Harold Wilson, 20th Century Man. Alan Johnson. Well, I don't know if Keir Starmer is 21st century man, Alan, but it has been an absolutely miserable fortnight, hasn't it?
It has. I was also a former Work and Pension Secretary, by the way, so I know.
I was going to come on. I was saving that back. But...
when you come on to when you do benefits and when you have to deal with that sensitive issue, you have to be even more careful than normal to bring your backbenchers along with you. I think this is a remarkably talented intake. And I'll fight you, Andrew, to be secretary of the Rachel Reeves Appreciation Society. I've known her a long time. She's a tough cookie. She ain't going to quit. But for those new MPs that have come in, many of them well-versed in benefits and the intricacies of benefits, they were looking at this bill very closely. That's their job. And I think what happened, whether it was through a lack of time, whether it's through a lack of attention, there were flaws in the system. I heard yesterday about a woman with Huntington's disease whose mother has it. She's going to get it because that's the nature of Huntington's disease. And a new process for assessing people under the disability element of universal credit and under other PIPs, she wouldn't qualify for it because of an anomaly there that should have been spotted earlier. Anyone diagnosed with Huntington's should be on, the full level. They shouldn't have to even go through any testing or any interviews. So I think that was what disturbed MPs, and that was the problem yesterday.
Alongside that, you mentioned you have to listen to MPs. There does seem to have been a problem in listening to MPs. Lots and lots of people have told me that they had concerns, they went to people and they weren't listened to or they were pushed to one side. Do you think that Keir Starmer's Downing Street has to work a better operation for engaging with the PLP, listening to them as well as talking to them?
Oh, undoubtedly. And on this issue in particular, I listened to some of the debate yesterday. MP after MP, actually from all sides of the House, were quoting local constituents. This is the glorious system of, I don't like first past the post, but I wouldn't lose the constituency link. It's a crucial part of it. And on things like welfare reform, you get, you really do get a good feel for how it affects people. But look, there was no cabinet rebellion, number one. What happened last night was bad, but withdrawing the bill at second reading or having it defeated would have been much, much worse. And what most people seem to be missing in some of the speculation today, I think deliberately, is that what Stephen Timms said is that Clause 5 of the bill that is the crucial element of it, will be withdrawn at committee stage. Now, the things that happen once a bill is going through, you can not only withdraw bills, you can also amend your own bill through that process. And there might be elements of that when people talk about the fundamentals of this and the amount of money that could change through the passage of the bill. And can I just suggest, Andrew, there's one thing that doesn't need any legislation, which is before people go on to PIPs, and people are going on it, working age people, overwhelmingly, week after week at an incredible rate. That's why the principle of this bill is right. Something has to be done about that. They go on without any face-to-face interviews. They're interviewed over the phone. And the introduction of a face-to-face interview, both for those coming on and for those already on, but on incapacity, which is a temporary process, but coming off, it needs to have the people there to interview properly. And that actually does cost a bit of money in recruiting more people to do it, but it doesn't need any legislation. And I think it's an essential element of reforming welfare at the moment.
Shrewdly spoken. Coming back to the politics, though, Alan, watching what happened at PMQs today, you saw the Chancellor very, very visibly distressed. It was difficult pictures to watch, actually. But I kind of was surprised. I thought Keir Starmer could have been a little bit more fulsome and forthright in his support for her. Do you think that was a mistake?
As he has been now? No, I think, the natural thing you do if you're a Prime Minister is not do budgets in advance or do reshuffles in advance. I hope he's not going to have a reshuffle. I particularly hope that talented women like Yvette Cooper and Lisa Nandy and Bridget Phillipson, and in particular Rachel Reeves, stay there to finish the job. The remarkable thing, here's my criticism of the PLP, if you like, not enough of them are giving her credit for what was an incredible budget last year. She took £75 billion, albeit from employers, but She's not going to tax a nation that's already being taxed more than at any time in my lifetime. And she put it into public services, and she changed some of those fiscal and financial rules that are very much geared at long-term investment. And she also increased the minimum wage by 6.7%. It was a very, very competent budget.
You see, that the really interesting thing about that is you say it and Labour insiders say it, but the public hasn't really heard that yet, hasn't noticed. Do you think that this government is failing to, as it were, convey its big message as vividly and crisply and effectively as it ought to do, and indeed needs to do, looking at the polls?
Yes, but I do think the PLP, who I've just lauded, the most talented, much more talented than my intake, by the way, with due deference to my colleagues, this is a really good bunch that have come in. But they've got to go out there and fight. They've got to go out there and not whinge about the problems they're having to their local constituency parties. They've got to make the argument for Rachel's budget. She can't do it on her own. And, she's a formidable woman. She probably hasn't got the kind of presentational skills that some other chancellors, namely Gordon Brown, who I served under. But it's a really tough job, and she's looking to the long term, and that's what's needed in this country.
Do you think some of these MPs are a little bit entitled, a little bit complacent?
Well, I hope that's not the case. I hope they see this as a line in the sand, because they ought to remember it's not just Keir Starmer's responsibility or Rachel Reeves. If this government can't succeed in getting things done in the terrible state this country's been left in, if this government with a majority of 165 can't do that, more and more people are going to be thinking, well, maybe, this silly business of going through a parliamentary democracy, maybe we need someone like Trump, maybe we need a dictator, maybe we need someone like Putin. Famously they said about Mussolini, made the trains run on time. I think liberal democracy is under attack at the moment, and there's a real onus on this government to succeed in what they've said they'll do. One of the things they said they'll do is reform the welfare system.
All right, Alan Johnson, thank you very much indeed for that. Let's hear next from Lord Maurice Glassman, the Labour peer and author of Labour, The Politics of the Common Good, who's widely accepted to be the architect of Blue Labour. Maurice, very good to have you on the show again. Alan Johnson was just saying there that liberal democracy itself is under threat at the moment. This is a very, very grave and serious moment for the country. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would agree. I think this is a very serious moment. I mean, obviously, from my point of view, I'm astonished at the degree to which people are willing to defend the welfare status quo. That this is the issue they're willing to...
Simply because the bill is going up and up and up, and unacceptable numbers of people are now living on benefit? Well,
it's time for a really new direction for the country in lots of ways. The old era is dead, and that's an era that I date from 1979 and Margaret Thatcher. We need to have an industrial strategy. We need to double the size of our army. We need to actually produce weapons. This is a time of war. There's a war going on in Europe. So Labour should be in position of having a strong state. Nationalisation, production is vital. And the idea that the existing welfare system is a good system, I think, is mistaken. I think there's time to really revisit that.
So you want to see much, much bigger changes than the ones we put through the Commons?
Yeah, this is a rise. This is a cutting a rise of 2% over the next 5 years. I don't think it's actually very significant at all.
Now, we've been talking at the top of the show about Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, looking very visibly distressed at Prime Minister's questions in the Commons today. What do you make of her position and the Treasury?
Well, obviously, the first and human response is, I really wish her well. I hope she's fine. I hope that if it is a personal issue, it's not an irresolvable one. And I hope she's given the time and space to resolve that. But she's under unbearable pressure in this job. I mean, we in Blue Labour take a different view. We would like to see an economics ministry under the leadership of the Prime Minister in number 10 and actually get rid of the Treasury.
Abolish the Treasury completely.
Yeah, because the Treasury is full of neoclassical economists who constrain, who don't see the point of industrial production. They're completely committed to the old era. It's an outdated institution that's not fit for purpose.
It's interested in finance, not in industry.
Exactly, and it sees everything in terms of individual maximisation of advantage. I mean, for example, when Michael Gove was Levelling Up Minister, he tried to bring in regional banks that would lend locally to revive the regions, and the Treasury said he couldn't do it because a bank had to maximise its profits. They're completely committed to an outmoded economic model. Now, if Labour wants to be a proper, radical government, I think it should really look at actually having an economics ministry, and within that there will be accounts. But you speak to any businessman, you cannot run a successful business from accounts. That's not where the dynamism goes. You've got to have a vision of where you're going.
Do you think that Keir Starmer is capable of having and expressing and leading that vision?
I honestly don't know. I mean, we're going to find out, Andrew, in the next 6 months what he's actually made of. I mean, is he going to drift along like this, and or is he going to actually articulate a new direction for the country? A lot of this goes back to the Brexit referendum, there's a lot of mourning for the loss of the old order. I think it's time to actually embrace the new.
But you have just said very vividly that the Treasury should go. Now, the criticism of Rachel Reeves is that she is, as it were, the Treasury made flesh, that she is a Treasury person. And the trouble is that Keir Starmer is completely hooped to her with sort of hoops of steel almost. Therefore, you abolish the Treasury, as you suggest. That's it for Rachel Reeves. And quite quickly, it's it for Keir Starmer too.
Maybe. I don't think it should be it for Rachel Reeves. I think it is the case. Look, I worked with Rachel when she was doing some very interesting things on the everyday economy, where she seemed to have a genuine understanding of the impact that globalisation was having on households and trying to think through that. I think it is the case that you could say that she's just articulating Treasury lines, but Labour itself, the Prime Minister himself, has got to think about how to restructure an effective government. I mean, look at where we are. One thing I would like to say, the bigger the state gets, the more useless it becomes. We've got to address this issue. It's an enormous thing.
And you say the next 6 months are critical. Why?
Absolutely critical, because we've got 4 years left. If there's not a significant articulation and change of direction that is more in harmony with the times that we live in, stronger defence, restore the integrity of the police, bringing contribution into the welfare system. I'm in favour of full employment, actually pursuing a policy of full employment. These are classic Labour things. Nationalisation of steel was a beginning, but I want to see the nationalisation of water, nationalisation of rail. There's got to be a direction here whereby the working people of this country and the working class in this country feel part of the nation and feel honoured and respected. And at the moment, it looks like the financial markets are calling the shots.
Really interesting. Maurice Glassman, Lord Glassman, thank you very much indeed for joining me.
Good to see you.
Coming up, after the Chancellor's tearful appearance at Prime Minister's Questions, the pound has dipped as her position comes into question. What can be done to restore confidence? More on that in a few minutes, but the time now, 6:18.
The Transport Secretary, Heidi Alexander, takes your calls from 7 p.m. on LBC.
18 or over.
Tonight with Andrew Marr. Watch live on both Global Player and the new LBC app.
6:19. Now, I mentioned the market reaction to what happened to Rachel Reeves earlier on, and it is really interesting. The bond markets in particular have been a kind of intimidating perpetual pressure on her all the way through, limiting her options for borrowing more. But as soon as rumours began to pass around Westminster earlier today that she might go, the cost of borrowing jumped up. I don't know what's happened since then, but it suggests that from the point of view of the market, she is, putting it gently, the least bad option. Let's talk to one of my favourite sources on all things financial, Bill Blaine, founder of Windshift Capital, who serves up his online analysis as Blaine's Morning Porridge. Bill, great to have you on the show. You've been watching the bond markets and the pound, I think, over the course of the day. What's your verdict?
Yeah, well, the way that gilts have crashed this afternoon just highlights just how febrile the political instability across all government bond markets is just now. And that's because it's becoming increasingly apparent that the massive government deficits that have funded all the Western capitalist economies are looking increasingly unstable. And there's a very simple rule about what's a good economy and what's a bad economy. I call it virtuous sovereign trinity. And that's that any nation with a stable currency, a sustainable bond market, and critically political competency will tend to do okay. And this morning, we haven't just seen gilt sell off, but we've also seen sterling collapse as well. When I say collapse, it's down from 138 to 136 against the dollar. But these are big moves, and they highlight just how nervous the markets are.
So the vultures are sort of flapping about all over the shop. But when they look at Britain, it appears to be the case that the markets fear that if Rachel Reeves was removed briskly from her job, whoever came afterwards would actually borrow more, tax more, and wouldn't have a tight grip on public spending. Is that a fair verdict?
I think that is a concern, but I suspect the market is going to take a very different view to this. I think we might be over-worried about what's going on. It's really, it's an incredible coincidence that this morning we had a 3-year, 5 billion sterling gilt auction, and it pulled in over 17.3 billion of global orders. It's actually the biggest ever order book we've seen on a sterling gilt issue.
That's really, and it went well.
Suggests that the market's still very able to finance the UK.
Well, that's very good news indeed. And when we look at what happened in the course of the day, was there any evidence at all that people were watching what happened at PMQs, or at least heard about the Chancellor being in tears and heard the rumours and took action?
I think there have been rumours for a long time that all was not well. But of course, that's been fueled by the almost blitzkrieg politics we've seen on anything that Labour has done. Now, the market really sees past the kind of thing that Boris Johnson was writing in the Daily Mail last week and focuses on the facts that Labour has been struggling to make difficult decisions, to make cuts and to improve the thing. And we've seen that Rachel Reeves has tried to stick to the rules. So the market's given her fairly good points in that. The moment it all went a bit, a bit wrong was during QMT, the Prime Minister's questions, where suddenly the market went, "Ooh, this might actually be happening." And that's where we saw the shock. That's why I think we might see this reverse quite quickly as the market says, well, look at the success of the gilts auction. Look at how good the UK's debt management office is at running the gilts market. Look at how firmly established the gilts market is. And then they'll say, this is really a political problem. We don't want to see Rachel Reeves go, but if there is a better solution, that needs to be done. I think the market would also be much happier if it saw some greater competency from Sir Keir Starmer as the leader. If he started acting like a leader rather than a sort of milder-mannered, quieter David Brent from The Office, it might help.
All right. Bill Blaine, thank you very much indeed. I've got that image in my head now. The row trundles on. The BBC is still facing questions over its broadcasting of the rap artist Bob Vylan's Glastonbury performance, a performance that has now caused him to be dropped from other festivals in both Manchester and in France. as this scandal goes on, what could it mean for the upper management of the BBC? Someone who has experience in managing media scandals such as this is David Yeland, founder of the specialist PR firm Kitchen Table, co-host of When It Hits the Fan, and former editor of The Sun. David, great to have you on the show. Let's talk about Tim Davie, the Director General, and his position. I speak to an awful lot of MPs, and there is really considerable anger right across the Commons about this last episode, and people are beginning to be fed up of the old BBC reaction, which is there'll be an inquiry and then deputy heads will roll.
Yes. Well, I would say I do think we need to get real about this, which is Tim Davie's not going to go over this. I don't think there's any chance of that whatsoever. There clearly are errors that have been made, but we're living through a time when we really do love to do this in this country, where the media and the politicians get themselves into a sort of doom scroll situation where he's got to go. And I think the reality is he's not going to go over this. The BBC are in a difficult situation, and yes, MPs are talking, and the chair of the DCMS committee has written to him, and the Secretary of State's written to him. We live in a country, and the listeners will understand this, I think, where nearly all the media is in competition with the BBC. So there is no other institution that gets such an unfair press. Now, I'm not saying that there are not.
David, Can I just jump in very quickly? Do you think it actually helps Tim Davie that hundreds of staff members have written to him with exactly the opposite complaint, that the BBC is too pro-Israel, at the same time that he's facing it's been going soft on Hamas and Hezbollah? In other words, if he gets it from both sides, the traditional thing is to say, "Oh, I must have got it right." Well,
I mean, you put your finger on. I mean, you have so much experience yourself at the BBC. You know what it's like there. The job of Director General of the BBC is one of the most difficult jobs in the country, and he is getting attacked from all sides. He's got the ambassador, the London-based ambassador, the Israeli ambassador here, calling for his head. He's got the foreign minister back in Jerusalem calling for his head. He's got the Secretary of State, Lisa Nandy, practically calling for his head. He's got most newspaper editors calling for his head. It's normal. For him, it is normal. I also think, and I don't know what your listeners would think about this, is, where do we go? Where do we go after Tim Davie? What would happen if he went? And, the BBC is very, very important, not just to this country, but to global media and to finding out what is happening in Israel and everywhere else.
Indeed. David Yeland, bring me the head of Timothy Davie. Thank you very much indeed. Much appreciated. Now then, back to that welfare vote we were talking about. Let's hear from Debbie Abrams, the Labour MP and one of the orchestrators of the rebellion against the welfare measures which caused so many concessions and chaos yesterday. After the government gave way on key points, she voted for the welfare bill last night, and I wanted to get her general feeling of the role she played in the government climb down.
It was important. I've worked in the disability rights field since I started as an MP, to be honest, and a little bit before as well as a public health academic. But it was very important to me, and particularly I've been working on issues around the deaths of claimants when you get policy wrong. And that was the focus, for not just for me, but for many of the others who have either lived experience themselves or family members or friends, and certainly their constituents.
Now, it has left the government in a real mess and looking pretty chaotic. We had the Chancellor of the Exchequer in tears, we don't quite know why, in the chamber today, and questions over her future, and the markets are having a go at the government as a result. Do you feel any kind of responsibility for the general chaos the government has been left in?
It's entirely regrettable that there has been fallout. Yes, I absolutely. I won't pull any punches. I suppose it was a decision about how can we best get the government in the right place around this policy that wouldn't further harm disabled people and their families, with many tens of thousands of children as well. How we were going to get that in the right place, and it's really unfortunate that we got to this, but that wasn't the intention in terms of embarrassing the government or undermining the government. This is about making sure the policy was right.
Inside government, they say there's just a basic lack of money. You know, they've taxed as much as they can, easily, certainly, and they've borrowed as much as they can, and everything is very, very tight. And there's another 5 billion now to find. And that either means they can't raise the two-child cap, or it may well mean in the autumn higher taxes. And they ask, you know, will people who've taken us on over this issue accept that we have to raise taxes and back us, even if that's unpopular?
And I argue back that over the course of the lifetime of this government, that we will make the savings that are required. It might not necessarily be in-year savings or immediate savings, but it will make that difference. The two-child cap is a really important one. I don't underestimate. With Helen Hayes, the chair of the Education Select Committee, we are the scrutiny team of the child poverty strategy as and when it's delivered. We take it very, very seriously, but there are different. To govern is to make choices. There are different. Because we should not be, as the Bank of England governor has said, we should not be absolutely driven by the OBR and scoring from the OBR.
And when you were negotiating over this, did anyone from government say, well, if it's not this, then it's going to have to be that, and that might be the two-child cap? Was that ever put to you as a choice?
No.
Finally, it's been a very, very rough period in terms of relations between Downing Street and the Parliamentary Labour Party. I think everybody can agree that. What would you like to see in terms of how things change going forward?
I think that there is a clear commitment to have a reset, really, between the government and the backbenchers. Particularly
more face-to-face meetings?
I would hope so. This is a very, very talented intake. I've been an MP for nearly 15 years. Huge talent, huge experience, both lived experience and, as I say, people who've worked in the sector and know a lot about this. And I think their experience is well worth noting. Policy development isn't precise science, but we need to make sure that we're better at it.
And finally, perhaps a personal thought or a personal message to the Chancellor. Not very popular on the backbenches at the moment, but she has had what has clearly been an absolutely miserable day.
Yeah, my heart goes out to her. Rachel's a lovely person, and we've all got things to learn about how things were conducted over the last few months. We need to do this better, and remember who we're doing it for. We really should do it better.
Debbie Abrams, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
We're going to stick with this story in a few minutes with a Cabinet Minister joining me in the studio to reflect on the day after the night before. But first, the time is now 6:32 and Amelia Cox has your news headlines.
The US rapper and music producer Diddy has been cleared of sex trafficking but found guilty of other sex offences at a high-profile trial in New York. Sean Combs was convicted of transporting for prostitution 2 of his former partners. The head of the Royal Navy has been sacked after an investigation found he fell far short of the values and standards expected. Sir Ben Key was reportedly suspended from his role in May over claims he had an affair with a female subordinate. And Downing Street says Rachel Reeves has the full backing of the Prime Minister after appearing upset at today's PMQs. A spokesperson for the Chancellor says she was dealing with a personal matter. LBC weather, mainly dry tonight and clear with any showers in the north starting to ease. Outbreaks of rain for Northern Ireland and Western Scotland in the early hours, lows of 6 degrees.
The Transport Secretary, Heidi Alexander, takes your calls from 7 p.m. on LBC.
apply.
Tonight with Andrew Marr. Listen on your smart speaker. Just say, play LBC.
6:35. Let's return now to the Commons and the dramas today, as well as the chaotic scenes last night after that nail-biting welfare vote. I have a Cabinet Minister in the studio with me now to discuss the fallout of one of the most consequential periods of Starmer's premiership so far. Nick Thomas Simmons. Nick, great to have you in the show. Before we get on to the detail of any of this, the Chancellor herself, have you had a chance to talk to her since the events in the Commons?
I haven't spoken to her since then, but I know that the Chancellor is fine. She is working in Downing Street. And I should say about the Chancellor as well. The Chancellor has done, is doing, and will continue to do an excellent job. Downing Street and the Prime Minister have previously said that she will be in that role until the next general election. And I know Downing Street have said that this afternoon as well. So the Chancellor is going nowhere.
Let me ask you a little bit more, because it's very, very unusual to see any senior politician as visibly distressed as she was today. Now, we're told it is a personal matter. Do you know what personal matter it is?
No, and I've not sought that detail. I think when people say that there's a personal issue, you always respect their privacy. And yes, Rachel is the Chancellor of the Exchequer, but she's also a human being. And you did see her being a human being. She is somebody, I've known Rachel many, many years. She's extraordinarily resilient, highly able, and is doing an excellent job. Just remember the circumstances that we inherited last summer, the £22 billion black hole in the public finances. She not only stabilised the economy, but is building on those foundations with investment in public services, including the NHS. But also, you've only got to look at business confidence, which is at, I think it's a nine-year high. Now, that shows the job she's doing well.
These are exactly the words which, had Keir Starmer found them in time and Prime Minister's questions, would have put to bed all the rumours that have been going around since about the Chancellor's future. Do you think it was a failure not to be a little bit more fulsome in her support of the Chamber?
Oh, look. Prime Minister's questions is an absolute bear pit. You know, I've been in many over the last decade as a member of Parliament, and Prime Ministers, whether it's Keir or whether it's other Prime Ministers, they don't always engage with everything that's thrown across them across the dispatch box. But the point is that Downing Street has again reiterated the position about the Chancellor remaining in post until the next election, and that's what's crucial.
Well, the markets, as we've just heard, are watching this the whole time very, very attentively. And the markets, because they're people, know very well that by and large, when a Prime Minister says somebody has their full support, that person is gone within a few days. So they're not very impressed. Don't you think that you as a government, the Prime Minister himself, and probably the Chancellor herself, have to make it clearer than ever before that she is staying and she is there for the long term?
Well, I can't be any clearer. Number 10 can't be any clearer than what they've said today about her remaining in post until the next general election. No question. So I can't be any clearer than that going forward.
Let me ask you a broader question. We had Lord Glassman, who you know, in the studio a little while ago, and he was saying, it's not Rachel Reeves that's the problem, it's the Treasury that's the problem. We need to reindustrialise this country. We need a much more working person focused kind of policy and strategy in politics. And the problem is the Treasury. We need to get rid of it. We need to have a big industrial department, a reindustrialisation department based in Number 10 with the Prime Minister leading it.
No, I mean,
I talked to you, of course, as the biographer of Harold Wilson and thinking about George Brown in the 1960s.
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, that experiment was tried in the 1960s between 1964 and 1966 and absolutely didn't work. So that's absolutely not the modern government's policy. However, on the point about industrial strategy, we've published our industrial strategy in the past week, and it's also allied, by the way, to the trade deals that this government has secured. The trade deal, of course, where I led the negotiations with the European Union, the economic deal with the United States, but also the free trade agreement with India. Now, that is where the government has been delivering, and we will, of course, be taking forward that trade and industrial strategy together to deliver jobs up and down the country.
Let me ask you, Nick, about fundamental Labour values, because for an awful lot of Labour MPs I've been talking to, what happened this week was really about who Labour is. And Labour is not and has never been a party that would penalise people who are in real pain, real suffering, are genuinely disabled. And they felt that these plans, however they were cooked up, however important the savings were an absolute assault not just on individual disabled people, but on Labour values.
Well, firstly, I'm not going to insult the intelligence of your listeners by saying anything other than this has been a very challenging week. But let me just take the principles with which we approach welfare reform, because I do think they are principles where there is a lot of unity, actually. Firstly, nobody makes the case that the current system is working well. We have, 1,000 extra people a day going on to personal independence payments. We need to look at why that is happening in the first place, look at the assessment criteria. That's what Stephen Timms will do in his review. But let me just say this as well. People agree as well that where there are people who want to work but need support to do so, we should be providing that support. That's what we're doing. We're not only investing in that support, but we're offering the right to try. So people can try. If it doesn't work out, they don't have to worry about losing their benefit. But the other thing is we need a sustainable welfare system going forward. We need it to be there exactly on, just to your point about Labour values. The welfare state is a proud Labour achievement of Clement Attlee's post-war government. It needs to be sustainable into the future and to have democratic consent for its existence. And to do that, we have to make sure it is there for those who need our protection most, and that is what we're doing too.
Don't you think that if you'd had a conversation with the country right after the election saying, look, there are huge numbers of people with anxiety, depression, stress going on to the system of benefits originally designed for people in wheelchair or with really, really serious medical conditions, and this is not right, and we're going to have to redo the system entirely, then you could have got to a position where you could have had more radical reform than you've done now and brought people with you. In other words, the big problem has been a problem of persuasion and political argument.
Well, look, firstly, I'm a great believer in parity of esteem between mental and physical health, so just say that first of all. But with regard to the point you're making, look, I do think that we came into office, we had a system that was a broken system we needed to reform, and I think we did move too quickly to the central argument that you are making. And I think it's hugely important that we take people with us, whether that is in terms of our backbenchers or indeed more widely the public. And I think what we have from last night now, whether it is the rebalancing of universal credit that is in the bill that will mean we take away those perverse incentives, preventing people who want to go back to work but can't, whether it is taking away the very undignified reassessment process for those with severe lifelong conditions. But allied to that, the work that Stephen Timms will now do. Stephen Timms, highly respected, not just in the Labour Party, but across politics, deeply experienced, can now take that forward.
Stephen Timms, a thoroughly good egg. We can agree with that. But just what you're saying about rushing it too much, do you think that you need to go through a period now of several years where the centre listens to your own backbenchers more attentively? Because these are not sort of wildly ideological people. They're very often people who've come from big and important jobs outside politics, and they've got experience and they know their constituents, and they just kind of feel they weren't being listened to.
Well, look, I think we have
big mistake.
We have a highly talented, possibly the most talented parliamentary party we've ever had, not just in terms of numbers, obviously, with 400 MPs, but also their talent. But the point about listening, to come to your point about listening, that is precisely what has been happening in recent days. I think that's where we've got to now, where we've got to. But going forward, Stephen Timms has also now not just tasked with this review, but doing it in co-production with those disability rights groups and other advocates up and down the country who do such important work. That is a hugely important part of it.
So lessons learned.
It will be moving forward as a team, absolutely taking the lessons of what's been a challenging week.
All right, Nick Thomas-Simmons, thanks very much for coming in. Now, our political correspondent, Aggie Chambray, has been getting the reaction of other MPs and politicians throughout Westminster today. Aggie, first of all, to the point about the Chancellor and the markets. This is not something that can be allowed just to carry on like this.
No, indeed. And you heard Nick Thomas-Simmons there being very clear, basically saying there can be no question from what I'm saying that the Chancellor will remain the Chancellor for the rest of the Parliament. If you look at what the markets are doing, it might potentially be useful for the Prime Minister to say that himself on the record in the coming days, because I think part of the chaos that happened earlier, and it was chaos, I mean, you saw it yourself in Parliament straight after PMQs, was the fact that the Chancellor was visibly upset. And yes, as we've talked about during this programme, that is a personal issue, but it comes in the backdrop of a very, very difficult 24 hours. And the chaos, I think, was partly because the Prime Minister was asked, specifically by Kemi Badenoch, whether or not the Chancellor would be the Chancellor at the end of the Parliament. And he sidestepped that. And yes, PMQs is a bear pit. We all know that. It is really difficult. And we do know Sir Keir Starmer is not the most nimble performer at PMQs.
But had he found the right words, a lot of this would have gone away.
I think so, despite the fact, even though it's been a really, really difficult 24 hours. And I think there is genuine shock among MPs, among people in government about really what's happened. And I think yesterday was probably the most chaotic day there has been since Labour got into government. And one minister said to me about the welfare argument, which I think was part of what you were kind of making the point to Nick Thomas-Symonds about as well, was the money over welfare, they said to me, became totemic. We needed to have a row about welfare and we needed to win it. And we just never successfully made the argument. And that was making the argument to their own MPs, to their own backbenchers, but also making that argument to the country about not just the fact that everyone agrees it needs change, which we hear a lot, but also why it needs change and how it can actually be changed.
That's a very, very important point. Let me ask you about another sort of more general one, which is you talk to some ministers and they say, OK, the backbenchers, feeling very, very strong and moral and all the rest of it, have taken away a £5 billion saving we were going to make. At some point, we're going to have to either cut something else to compensate, or we're going to have to raise more money, possibly a very, very unpopular tax rise. When are they going to take responsibility for their own actions and back us on the other unpopular things we have to do? In other words, they can't just keep saying more, more, more. They have to help us out. Any sign that that message has got through at all?
Well, it's interesting because you say they can't just keep saying more, more, more. But over the past few months, they have kept saying more, more, more. And they basically got what they wanted. The kind of rump of Labour MPs have been really worried, really cross about winter fuel. And then there was a U-turn, grooming gangs, a U-turn. And now this, a U-turn, and now questions about the two-child benefit cap. Well, government sources saying today, well, we don't have the money for that. And they don't really have the money for that. We know the economics are in a pretty perilous situation, despite the fact they keep on saying the green shoots of recovery are coming through. And it is difficult to set this precedent where if you kind of are angry enough as a backbench Labour MP, then there is a U-turn. And there is a kind of sense of it slightly turning. I thought it was quite striking listening to Alan Johnson almost suggesting that, you know, they do need to listen as well to the Number 10 operation and listen to the government ministers.
What a fascinating few days it's been. Aggie, thank you so much. Now, if this is something, it is a lot, but it might be nothing. Hamas says it's reviewing new ceasefire proposals for Gaza after Donald Trump claimed that Israel was now ready for a 60-day peace deal. But we've been here before, and it all collapsed. And anyway, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu doesn't sound as if he is in a particularly peacemaking frame of mind. He's quoted as saying today, there will not be a Hamas, there will not be a Hamastan. We are not going back to that. It's over. Yet Trump sounds excited about a breakthrough. He said he believed Netanyahu wanted to end hostilities. He wants to. I can tell you he wants to. I think we'll have a deal next week, he said. So is there really any hope for a partial withdrawal of Israeli troops and Hamas releasing the last hostages? I'm joined now by Michael Orin, the former Israeli ambassador to the United States and former member of the Knesset and former Deputy Minister for Diplomacy to the Israeli Prime Minister. Michael Orin, thank you so much for joining us. Can I ask you for your take on this rather confusing situation about whether or not Prime Minister Netanyahu is ready to sign a new peace deal?
Well, let me begin. First of all, it's good to be with you. Begin with the good news. What's the good news? The prime minister comes out of this latest war with Iran politically strengthened, in a position to better withstand the more radical right-wing elements within his own coalition. They've always been a check on his ability to negotiate a ceasefire. President Trump is stronger in position as a result of the war and better poised to, say, put pressure on some of Hamas's backers, particularly in Qatar. Hamas, by contrast, is weakened. Its patron, Iran, has been deterred, humiliated, set back. It's not receiving funds. It's interesting to note that Hezbollah is on the verge of bankruptcy in Lebanon for precisely the same reason. So that would all seem to, say, augur well for the possibility of a breakthrough. At the end of the day, you're still left with the major stumbling block. And what's the stumbling block? The stumbling block is not the length of the ceasefire. The stumbling block hasn't even been about the number of prisoners who will be released from Israeli jails. It's a question of bargaining. The big issue is much more fundamental. Are the ceasefires open-ended? And If not, does Israel retain the right to renew the fighting should Hamas reassert itself in Gaza? And that has been the sticking point. Hamas obviously wants an open-ended ceasefire.
Just alongside that, however, I don't want to put myself in the shoes of Hamas ever, but nonetheless, you can see from their point of view, why would they sign any kind of deal with somebody who says he wants to annihilate them forever?
Exactly. No, I don't disagree with you. And I probably even less than you want to put myself in the shoes of Hamas, but certainly. And not just that, why would they give up assets, quote unquote, which are the hostages, in return for a situation where Israel could then come back in and go to war? So that's the sticker. On the other hand, put yourself in Mr. Netanyahu's shoes. You may be, equally loath to do that, but here you go. And that is, Hamas has said that if there's an open ceasefire, it will come out of the tunnels. It will rearm and reassert itself, and it will, and I'm quoting them, it will launch 10,000 10-7s, October 7th, until Israel is destroyed. And then you've got to answer to the many thousands of Israelis, the hundreds of thousands of Israelis who fought in this war, the many, many thousands who have been wounded in the war, 881 have been killed in the war, and their families. What was this all for? And by the way, people won't go back to live in the southern part of the country. You're going to have a huge swath of the country that will be uninhabitable. So it is a rough decision, a very rough decision. So the question is, can it be, as they say in diplomacy, can it be fudged? Can you create a situation where you say have a 60-day ceasefire and a commitment by Israel and Hamas to discuss the continuation of the ceasefire, or discuss, as they say, the ending of the war, which is very, very diplomatic ease for really nothing's going to happen, which is the best you can do. I know that President Trump thinks he's being, he said earlier this morning, at like 2:00 in the morning Israel time, that he's going to be firm with Mr. Netanyahu and demand an end. But still, there's going to be a limit to which he can press on that issue of what comes after the ceasefire.
Yeah, this is really, really hard to call. I think perhaps not for the first time Donald Trump is being a little over-optimistic about his reach and what's going to happen, but I hope not. Mr. Orin, thank you very much indeed for talking to LBC. Now, Sean John Combs, or P. Daddy, or Diddy Combs, famous Harlem-born rapper and record producer on trial for sex trafficking and racketeering. His ex-girlfriend, Cassie Ventura, testified about years of alleged physical abuse and being forced to participate in marathon sex encounters involving drugs and prostitutes directed by Diddy Combs and known as freak-offs. Many other celebrities have been caught up in the web of allegations, and the New York jury has just found him guilty of transportation for prostitution, but not of sex trafficking or racketeering, the more serious offences. Let's talk now to somebody who's been following this case very closely from the start. Kayla Brantley, Daily Mail correspondent and co-host of the podcast Judgment Day, the trial of Diddy. Kayla, thank you very much indeed for joining me. In brutal terms, who do you think emerges from this as the winner?
Hi, thanks for having me. So this was absolutely a win for Sean Diddy Combs. He was found guilty of the lesser charge. He faced 25 years to life in prison if he was found guilty of that big racketeering charge. But he was acquitted of racketeering and sex trafficking, which were the most serious charges, only to be found guilty of transportation to engage in prostitution. Now, each of those counts carry a maximum of 10 years each. So right now he does face a maximum of 20 years. Prosecutors have called for him to be charged with the max, or to be sentenced rather, with the maximum sentence of 20 years. Of course, his team has fought back, but sentencing will take place within the next few weeks. And right now, his team have asked for a $1 million bond until that day.
Well, it sounds like he's facing a jail sentence of some kind. But this trial has been seen by many people as a test of the way women are treated in the music industry, and particularly around rap and hip-hop artists, and a sense that, in a way, in that particular industry, men have been given a free pass that doesn't exist anywhere else. Is there any sense that this trial has changed that culture?
Well, when we look back to the Me Too movement, you've seen this happen with Harvey Weinstein, you have Bill Cosby, and now you have Diddy. with those cases, Harvey Weinstein is behind bars, Bill Cosby was acquitted, and now we have Diddy. This isn't the first case, and unfortunately, it likely won't be the last. But one thing that is a recurring theme in all of these cases is that a lot of times this was an open secret. There were whispers about improper conduct going on at these Diddy parties for years. There was a phrase that said, "Ain't no party like a Diddy party," and, rumors, and that goes also with Harvey Weinstein and Bill Cosby. So, like I said, this isn't the first, and it likely won't be the last, unfortunately.
So the same thing of gross behaviour, almost in plain sight, and for some reason the culture doesn't look at it directly, and then finally, the spotlight comes on what's happened. And I say again, do you think this is a moment when people are going to think, hold on a second, this is an industry which has been misbehaving in a particular way for a very, very long time, and now it needs to finish?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, people have been saying this for years, if not decades, that, there's something up with Hollywood, that things aren't right. And this kind of just sheds a light on it. But I do want to add that due to, the Me Too movement and everything, that is partially the reason why Cassie came forward. And once Cassie Ventura, his ex-girlfriend, did come forward, filed a lawsuit in 2023, you had a flood of victims alleged victims come through, and with crazy allegations against Sean Combs. So even though he appears to be kind of out of the woods now, he still has dozens of civil lawsuits waiting for him.
An absolutely massive case finally coming to an end. Keller, thank you very much indeed for talking to LBC. The Bank of England is calling for the public to tell what figures or landscapes or buildings we'd like to see on the next generation of banknotes, which may or may not mean that Sir Winston Churchill disappears from the fiver. Let's get the reaction on this from the renowned British military historian, Professor Hugh Strachen from Oxford University. Hugh, thank you very much indeed for joining me. Now, Winston Churchill kind of stands above all other semi-modern politicians for most people, but the thought of him disappearing from a banknote in favour of a more fashionable figure will, I assume, infuriate you or dismay you or certainly upset you.
Not at all.
No.
I think I find it extraordinary that you should be concerned. It seems to be, first of all, it's going to be the £5 note. I struggle to find a £5 note in my wallet most of the time. So from that point of view, it doesn't seem to me particularly worrying. But as I was reviewing the notes that are in my wallet, I was struck how actually the fashion is for figures from early 19th century literature, art, Turner, Austin. Here in Scotland where I am, Bank of Scotland note has Walter Scott on it.
Yes.
I think you're worrying unnecessarily, was my own feeling. Will they go for a political figure is a good question. That probably is too difficult for many banks these days.
I was pretending to worry. I wasn't really worrying. And I also very rarely see a £5 note these days. But it's an interesting conundrum because obviously there'll be people who want a very, very up-to-date, fashionable figure. But what we know about all fashionable, modern, up-to-date figures, political or artistic or anything else, is they can very suddenly and very quickly go out of popularity again. In other words, the sort of patina of history hasn't landed on them and made them secure.
Yes, I think the case for going for somebody who is dead and probably quite long dead does smack of what a bank will do, because you don't want to have to withdraw from circulation large numbers of notes because somebody has suddenly dropped very much out of favour and it's not doing the currency any good. So whether you should go for a political figure at all, I mean, if at least by going for a cultural figure from the past, you avoid going for somebody like Peel, Disraeli, Palmerston, or whatever, which would be the equivalent of the cultural figures they seem to favour.
The controversial one would be Margaret Thatcher, but I can see a safer bet would be somebody like Alan Turing, perhaps, or some of the more kind of big cultural figures. David Hockney, I don't know.
Sure.
That'd be a very brightly coloured note, that would be.
Well, it'd be rather good to have a note designed by David Hockney. That would be good. That would be good fun. I'm all in favour of that idea.
All right, Hugh Strachen, thank you very much indeed for talking to me tonight. I will be back with you tomorrow. If you've missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on both Global Player and the LBC app, where you can stay up to date with all the latest news and opinion. You can put your news categories in the order you want. You can pause and rewind live radio, and you can listen to a range of podcasts. Download the official LBC app for free from your app store now. Coming up at 10 on LBC, it's Ben Kentish. But right now, it's time for Ian Dale.
Thank you very much, Andrew. For the next hour, I'm going to be joined by a leading member of Keir Starmer's cabinet, the Secretary of State for Transport, Heidi Alexander. She's here mainly to answer your questions, mainly on transport issues, but it's Labour's first anniversary in power this week, so you may have some thoughts on that. But I'm sure you have lots of views and questions on the railways, HS2, airport capacity and expansion, and much else besides. Lines are open right now.